Welcome to another edition of On the Bookshelf. I'm Pete Solomon. The Healing Book is a book of 13 short stories by renowned author Dustin Grinnell. In the book, he spotlights people in crisis. And we're delighted to have Dustin with us to read from his work and to discuss his 2023 book, The Healing Book.
The news of Laura's cancer had greatly upset her husband, Dr. David Mitchell, then a renowned cardiac surgeon in Boston. A man of action, a problem solver, David was frustrated that he encountered a problem he couldn't seem to solve. Out of his depth, he sought out the best oncology specialists in nearby hospitals and threw himself into the study of metastatic breast cancer, spending late nights in his study hunched over scientific journals and textbooks. David and Laura spent many meals discussing medical advances and experimental cancer therapies. The conversations fatigued Laura, who was a retired preschool teacher, but she agreed with David that they would fight her cancer with everything they had. They tried all of the available cancer treatments: chemotherapy, radiation, surgery, a cutting-edge immunotherapy trial. All interventions failed, however. CT scans showed the spread of tumors. Several months into the assault on the disease, Laura took David's hand one night in bed and told him that she wanted to discontinue treatment. David avoided eye contact, flipped over, and switched off the lamp. The next day, he burst into action. Within a week, David had sold their Beacon Hill condo and bought a small cottage in western Massachusetts. During move-in, David instructed the movers to arrange his study as it had appeared in their Boston home, with hundreds of books on several bookshelves, a laptop connected to a desktop computer, and stacks of notepads containing ideas about cancer treatments. That first winter night in the cottage, David worked in his study while Laura stared into the fireplace with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. That night, Laura thought about the nightmare David said he'd had right before he decided to uproot them and move across the state. In his dream, he had watched Laura die in his arms after failing a series of conventional treatments. It was then that he felt the pull against reason and science. The next morning, he committed to trying anything that might help him save his wife, even if that meant entering into the wilderness of alternative therapies, which he had always considered hogwash, even dangerous, given the lack of scientific evidence proving their safety and efficacy. David admitted that a man of science had become a man of hope.
Welcome back, Dustin Grinnell. We enjoyed talking about the Empathy Academy with you the last time you visited On the Bookshelf.
Thank you.
And this is a remarkable book, a book about people essentially in crisis, correct?
Yes.
Good. We talked about your background the last time, but in case people weren't aware of it, we should say that you have an outstanding academic background. You have your BA in psychobiology from Wheaton College down in Norton. You have a master's degree in physiology from Penn State. And then when you were in your mid-30s, you entered the Solstice Writing Program for a master's in fine arts at LaSalle University. I wonder, you've been a writer for the longest time in your life. You've thought like a writer, you've done things like a writer. If we looked at writing that you did when you were a young writer and compared it to the writing you did after you got your MFA, was there a marked difference between the two?
Well, it's interesting. The MFA I had gotten after I had self-published 2 science fiction novels. Mm-hmm. So I already had a sense of craft. I knew I wanted to write science fiction. I had read a lot of craft books before I went and got an MFA. But I think my interest in science went all the way back to childhood. I was always interested in space science. When I was really young, I wanted to be an astrobiologist. And eventually did biology and genetics. These things became very interesting to me. And I think when I was very young, I think in like 5th or 6th grade, I wrote my first science fiction story. It was about astronauts. It was about young kids actually who had gone on a field trip with their English teacher to basically explore the solar system. So there were seeds of science-based stories early on. It wasn't very good, but it was really something that It's been always there.
I'm sure it was very good. And,
Yeah.
from that came an outstanding writing career. We should mention, you talked about the fact that the Healing book is a book of 13 short stories, and we agreed it's about people in crisis. But you also published a book called Lost and Found, which is 23 essays, essentially a travel book.
Yeah.
When you look back at the publication of those two books, what was the difference in the process, if any?
Well, they're all short, first of all. The book Lost and Found is personal essays. So they're all around 3,000 to 5,000 word long. The 13 stories in the Healing book are all about that size. Some are a little bit longer. I think what they share in common is they all the stories come from a place of my own personal experience. In the case of Lost and Found, that's actual nonfiction, so I'm telling actual real stories about my travels, about my work. And
does that make it easier? Because you've lived those.
Yeah, it's well, you still have to tell a story. So I'm trying to figure out what is going to be, it's not a diary entry, right? It needs to be something that readers will want to make it all the way through, right? So you have to tell a story. You have to have things in there that are worth people's time, essentially. And that takes both good subject matter. You got to pick a good topic, but then also good command of craft. If you're even in nonfiction, you can use fictional techniques. You can have a good hook. You can use dialogue. You still have to treat yourself as a character almost. Describe yourself. Describe what you're thinking. So that provides like a rich reading experience for people.
What's the chronology of the 13 stories that comprise the Healing book? Did you write them all at the same time? Were some of them left in your computer for some time before they were published? How did
I
that
started around the time of the pandemic, so around 2020. So it was about 3 years of writing or so. Yeah, you could call this, I guess, a pandemic book. I started this book during that time, and I basically just used it as a place to put my attention in a time of confusion and fear, and I think I found some sense of solace in writing stories about healing during a time of great suffering.
Interesting. Was it easier to write during the pandemic because you had more time, or was it more difficult because all of us were a little disconnected?
That was obviously like a really kind of horrible time for everybody.
Sure.
But from an artistic standpoint, I found it to be very fruitful. I was essentially locked in my room, and I just threw myself into work, and I devoted a lot of time to these stories. And I think the greatest gift for a writer would be, time and solitude, and maybe a little bit of disconnection, to really lose yourself in the work. And I did that.
The book is entitled The Healing Book. As you laid the stories out, the Healing Book is actually the 6th story in the series.
Yeah.
How did you hit on that title? And why was it placed number 6 instead of, say, number 1? Because it was also the title of the book. And finally, were you concerned at all that people would go through a bookstore, see the Healing Book, and think, oh, this is one of these medical books or something that the doctor would like me to read? And did you think that might be a little off-putting, because you have some wonderful titles in the other stories that really struck a chord?
Yeah, well, thematically the book is about healing, healing from psychological and spiritual and philosophical issues. And so I felt like the story titled The Healing Book about sort of a doctor trying to manage the illness of his wife's cancer just felt like it should be right in the center of the stories. And so that's essentially what I did. Yeah.
Now, you're the guest, not me, but I will tell you that as I read the book, the Healing Book, the story, really struck a chord with me as a cancer survivor. And I thought that you captured the feelings one has when they're dealing with that very well.
Is that so?
Yeah.
Do you mind if I ask you what actually resonated? Which part?
The fact that the woman who is so courageous, Laura, is dealing with it, and her husband seems to have a more difficult time because he feels so helpless.
That's right. I think like the story was familiar to me because this character, David Mitchell, he's, like I said in the reading, like he's a man of action. He's a problem solver. And so he was, he thought he could just throw everything at his wife's illness, all the traditional approaches, and then even later on, alternative approaches. And he thought he solved most problems in his life, and why couldn't he solve this? But it was an illness that was very difficult to treat, and he lost the battle. And I should say Laura lost the battle. I mean, she died of her illness, and I think there's a poignancy to the story in that, like, all this time he spent trying to cure her, even writing a book with the intent to possibly like calm her nerves and you know, reduce her stress. He could have been spending time with her. You know, he could have been spending those cold winters in embrace, and instead of working, instead of I should say futilely working, you know. And I think there's some lines in there about how Laura had written in her diary that she would have rather, you know, she liked that David was so, you know, heroic in a way, but she would have rather he just stopped working a little bit earlier and came and laid with her and gave her comfort.
What you've just proven we've been doing this show since 2016, and apparently when you sit on that side, you do get to ask the questions. You know, in trying to create an environment where people will hear about these stories and maybe they'll strike a chord and go out and read the book and enjoy it, as we did. But unfortunately, because of the time constraints, we probably can't talk about all 13.
Of course. Yeah.
So in preparing for our visit, I wrote a line or two about each story, and I'm going to ask you to talk about maybe the motivation for writing them, or how they came about. And as I said a moment ago, some of the titles are really well thought. Were there any stories you can think of where you had a title picked out and then you said, you know, I think I got a better one?
Well, the story "The Affable Man" just came to mind.
That's a great title.
Yeah, it's funny because that came from my personal life. I was in an office, and I was in a performance review, just like that story starts. And my manager said, "You know, you're such an affable guy," you know, and it was a compliment, you know. It meant I was friendly and people liked to be around me and stuff. But something about it just rubbed me the wrong way. Affable felt docile. It felt passive. And I realized the office setting had done that to me in a way. It had sort of made me. It sort of dimmed my light a little bit, I guess you could say. And so it's a story about a man who tries to have some more agency in his life. And he almost becomes a vigilante at the end. But the affable title, that's irony, you know. He's an affable guy, but he ends up becoming a vigilante.
Well, but you talk about affable as being something positive, and some people would take it as if it were in the pejorative.
Yes.
It's like, is that the best thing we can say about this man?
Right.
And in reading it and in putting together my notes, I refer to him as more of a nondescript man, just going out to the office every day and putting in his work. And so what happens in the story is so out of character, that's what makes it a fun story to read.
Yeah, he's an everyman, right? But he's essentially a little spiritually deadened inside after all those years sitting in front of a desk. And yeah, he goes to sort of a SeaWorld equivalent.
Yes.
And he looks at a orca whale in its tank, and he makes eye contact. And there's something resonant in that gaze. There's something about the imprisoned sea creature that resonates with him. he feels that the whale has also kind of lost something.
Yeah.
And indeed it has. The conditions under which those animals are put is we've seen it.
Which is why they are no longer.
That's right.
In that environment.
And he decides to free it. He's going to free that whale.
It's a great story.
And he does. Yeah. It's a little fantastical, but yeah, it's something. It took a vigilante to do something to put the world right again.
One of the titles I really liked, Dustin, was The Dark Side of Destiny, and it's about a man named Winston Solomon,
Yeah.
who was a high school football player. I was a basketball player. We share a last name, but that's about all. His character encounters the very charismatic Dr. Nathan Black and a man with a very unusual machine.
That, that's a story about, also a little bit from personal experience. We've all taken like personality tests, like the Myers-Briggs test.
We did.
And they sort of, after you take them, they purport to tell you a lot about yourself, what careers you may be interested in, who you may get along with romantically. And I always thought they were just, they overreached a little bit too much. So the story is about a scientist who creates a machine that can essentially understand who you are at the most deepest level, your temperaments, genetically who you are. So like, and then also like does psychological tests, and sort of gets a sense of like who you are as a person, and then makes a prediction about like what you should do for work. And a lot of people, we live lives where we're just making it up every day. Like careers are sort of zigzag, and you don't really, you're just doing the best you can. So to have a machine, a test that can give you certainty, that can sort of get rid of that uncertainty that it's in life. You're supposed to do this job with 99% certainty. Well, that would be a great help to society, I think. But turns out in this story, to give it away, is that it was inspired by the Elizabeth Holmes Theranos story, where she tried to come up with a very sophisticated piece of technology that would, that didn't work.
Yes.
She was pushing the bounds of physics. It just didn't work. And so I drew from that that the scientist was essentially faking the data. And the story is told from the perspective of a journalist, and he breaks that story.
But again, without trying to spoil it, the irony at the end really does grab you.
Yeah.
That was one of my favorite stories.
Oh, cool.
Our guest is Dustin Grinnell. He's the author of several books, including his latest from 2023, The Healing Book. You're watching On the Bookshelf. I'm Pete Solomon. Thanks for joining us. Another one of the books that, another one of the stories that I really enjoyed was Searching for the Meaning in the Stars. And it is a story of friendship, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm glad you thought about it that way. Yeah, it's a story about a very intellectual man who has completely lost any meaning in life. He's essentially become a nihilist. He thinks life is completely meaningless because he's a physicist, an astrophysicist, and he takes a very cosmological point of view on life. We're just the Earth is just this small blue marble in the inky blackness of an infinite space.
Sure.
And that bums him out. And so he has to kind of fight back into meaning. Like, how does he regain the loss of meaning from that? How does a nihilist become someone who can find purpose in life? And he reads a lot of philosophy. He does a lot of thinking. He even writes a book about kind of space science and part memoir a little bit. But I think the beating heart of the story is the friendship he has with a guy named Mac. And Mac is just he's a working class guy. He fixes boats around the marina.
They couldn't be more different.
That's right. But they're friends, and they share a curiosity for the world and for big questions. They like drinking beer on on Mac's porch, and there's a lot of things that maybe quote unquote healed Alexander, the protagonist, healed his like spiritual crisis he was going through. And I think one of the biggest factors was friendship, companionship, camaraderie. You know, I think this is a man who was disconnected, and he found a friend, and a friend has an incredible healing power, I think.
And gets him through his crisis.
He gets through it. He writes his book. He moves into the cabin on Lake Winnipesaukee, and he finds that there's no meaning in life. There is none. And where there is meaning, though, is in life. It's in the living. There's no, from a cosmological perspective, there's no intrinsic meaning to a human life, but we have to invent it. We have to create that meaning for ourselves as if it were a fiction, and we just have to believe in it. And we have to go forward every day with whatever we choose.
One of the stories that moved me, certainly, was Cubicle. A young student filmmaker winds up getting a great assignment and makes the most of it as a firm is converting their office space into cubicles, and he spends the summer following the people at work there and watching them make this conversion and recording their every thought. Did that strike a chord that made you want to write it because of your work as a marketing manager and the work you've had over the years at scientific operations?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, a big part of these stories, they're all sort of based on real life in some way. And for better or for worse, I've been in corporate America for 10 years or so. And I've seen some stuff. I've seen some things. You know, corporate America, there's some things like restructurings that happen, and people get nasty. Bad things happen. There's gossiping and rumors and backstabbing and power grabs and politics, lots of politics. And I don't want to get revenge. I don't want to hurt anybody's feeling. I don't want to call anybody out. So in fiction, you can play with it. You can observe it. And so I wanted to take an anthropological look at the office. So I came up with this idea of a filmmaker, a student filmmaker, who's kind of young and naive to the world of corporate America. And he comes in and he just rolls camera on scenes within the office. So performance reviews, firings, meetings, and what he sees is kind of like the bureaucracy, the excesses, the kind of the meanness that happens sometimes interpersonally, and he just gets it all on camera and non-judgmentally creates a documentary about what he's seen, and then he invites everybody from the office to come see it play in a theater in Somerville. And so everybody comes in, they think they're going to be like celebrities, and what they find is that they are actually ashamed of how they've acted. And they haven't done anything directly mean. They've just done things that they don't think they should have done now that they've seen it on camera. And so that's how I dealt with the things I saw in corporate America.
And because of his age and his position in life, is he too naive to realize that that's really the inevitable outcome of a situation like this, don't you think?
Yeah. Yes.
Time, as it does so often, is getting away from us. I want to talk about Disciple, if we can.
Yeah, of course.
Where Gabby is in a community, and she is under the spell of the charismatic leader Orion.
Yeah.
You read about situations like this all the time.
Yeah.
And again, without spoiling your hard work and what you created, I was surprised and a little disappointed at the ending. Not disappointed in the quality of the writing, disappointed in the decision that the young woman makes.
So, yeah, that's a very short story. It's like flash fiction, right? So, yeah, she's in a cult. She has been in it for a very long time, and as these things go, there's a lot of programming happens. There's, in a lot of cases, this is your family. You know, you've maybe detached from your actual family, your actual friends, and so she does find the courage to get out. I think maybe what you're referring to is that she gets on the bus to go back.
Yes.
But I will say, did you get the sense that she was going back in order to free others or to go back into delusion? Because I thought I wanted to make it the former. It was her.
See, and I thought the latter.
Okay, that's my fault. Because I tried to set it up as she has this revolutionary spirit and that she's finding the courage to go back and help others break away as well.
Interesting.
Not to
I
go
may
back
have to
into,
reread that one.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah, it should be clear, so that's my fault.
Time again has become our enemy, but it was a wonderful opportunity to have a chance to visit with you once again.
Thank you.
We wish you nothing but good luck in your future endeavors, and you're always welcome to one of these seats.
Yeah, we'll be back. I'll take the right one next time.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Dustin Grinnell, our guest on this edition of On the Bookshelf. We thank you for joining us. I'm Pete Solomon. We'll see you next time.